You can sit my neck.
Thank you.
Yeah. If you remember that, this is Bridget.
I we see each other fairly often. Yeah. I'm well.
I figured you'd want to come to a council meeting, see how it
We'll
operates.
see how we work.
Potentially help you with some minutes somewhere down the line.
Good idea. Good idea. Always good to have a back.
That's bad.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, go by. I always stop here because I never know if we have a page or something. It's all recorded, so it doesn't really matter. No. We have all three people. Sorry.
Aggressively loud today.
Is that what it is? I can hear it. Yeah.
Usually not this loud. I don't think it is.
Just
Should only go that fast. It's overheating. Or not overheating. It's hot.
4 o'clock.
It was good while it lasted.
These things should last a while.
Yeah, lunch, it's gonna be like this. That's full, right? Small hand box. Oh, yeah. It's kind of interesting, no logos. This weekend. How to, they were staying away. But no, I kind of stayed away from downtown. It's like Jesus has some cars. So we got to look here. Well, that's, you know, what I was thinking. At least see the TV. Watch a little bit. Cut on the cable forever that.
It's a nice
COVID
write-up.
started, the two years, I watched the two.
Oh, from Todd.
We're still paying for it, right?
Clearly gave us the thought.
Yeah.
Here's one. Hi, nice.
I love local news. CSI movies I like to watch. Yellowstone. Somebody take better notes than you.
In case I croak off or something, at least somebody else knows how to do it.
That's pretty impressive. Her shorthand's readable.
It is, yeah, yeah, there's the kids were in school.
I can't even read my own writing, but after.
We didn't have computers when we were school. But it's
She's like this meeting.
When we were done.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see if it's going on. Years.
Our chief was, our association. So she was, so.
Say that.
I'm sure everyone's muted. So.
Get That dog's needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's a little slow. Just FYI.
Microsoft, it's gotta be great.
Mine says 7.
That's a dangerous assumption.
Right. Alright. 7:00, everyone. Thank you for coming. Let's all rise to pledge allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, Nick.
Yes, sir. John Leo.
Here.
Nancy Rondell.
Here.
Matt Bagheera.
Here.
John Cox. And Al Dyke is absent, but we do have a quorum.
All right. Citizens' comment time. If there's something that's not on the agenda, this is your time to address council.
If you could also please state your name and address before you speak for the record. Thanks.
I'm Rachel Roon, I'm the Parks Director here for the City of Harbor Springs. I just wanted to let everyone know we held our first Winter Fest at Kiwanis Park this past Saturday, and it was a great success. We had a great turnout with about 40 vehicles around 1 p.m. I want to thank the Mary Claire Reynolds Joyce Fund, the Petoskey Harbor Springs Area Foundation. We were able to put on the event using zero general fund dollars. It was all grants and donations. I want to take this time to thank a few important people and businesses that made this event so special. Thank you to the Marina Park Committee, John Cups and the local fire department for helping tow families up the hill. That was definitely the highlight. Still the show. Our local DPW, the electric department, the police, Tyler Hoff, as we said, Small Batch for providing food, our local IGA for supplies, Keller Caretaking, and Jeff James for donating the firewood, the Rondell family, Karen Stroud and Nubs Knobs for decor and decorations for the building, Culligan Water, and to all our wonderful National Honor Society students and other volunteers. Special thanks to Dana Mulder for her wonderful painting skills and organization skills, keeping me sane throughout the week. And Victor for some last minute help the morning of and his support. We hope this event brought light to how important Kiwanis Park is to our community and the potential that the park holds. And huge thank you to all that joined us. Also, the first Parks Board meeting will be tomorrow night here at 6. So we welcome everybody via Zoom or in person.
One more person to thank is Rachel, who did a fantastic job. Well done.
There's many events. Anyone else for public comment?
We have a couple comments on Zoom. Bonnie Culp was wonderful. Thank you, Rachel, for a wonderful event. The Harbor Springs Fire Department were awesome. Thanks all. And then Tom Varner, this probably should belong in the discussion item, but I've checked the parking meter in Harbor Springs.
There's no other citizens' comment. To the consent agenda. Discussion on that.
It'll look good to me. I'd make a motion that we approve.
Any comment from the citizenship?
Second.
Second.
Cops. John Leo.
Yes.
John Cops.
Yep.
Matt Bagheera.
Yes.
And Nancy Rondell.
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right. On to the master plan.
All right, great. So the master plan review and approval. The planning commission, as you know, has been working on the master plan for about 2 years now. It's been with COVID kind of threw some wrenches in there with being able to hold public meetings. And so we have to shift our meetings to online surveys, but it's been a journey. We've had some change up on the planning commission as well, but we have a document now that's ready to go on the next step in the process. And I've outlined that process here. Tonight's purpose of this meeting is not to necessarily adopt the plan. What we're doing is we're approving it for distribution to other entities such as neighboring townships, Northwest, our regional planning agency, as well as the public, to eventually hold a public hearing at the planning commission level. So what we're doing here at council today is approving that next step in the process for distribution so we can have a public hearing. After that, what happens is the planning commission will hold a public hearing at least 42 days after this approval here. That's state law. And then after that public hearing, the planning commission will either adopt the master plan by resolution or make some necessary changes or hold more public hearings if they feel necessary, and then adopt a master plan that they send on to council. The council then can choose whether or not the council wants to hold a public hearing after that to make any additional changes. If they make additional changes, they kick it back to the planning commission to consider, and then it goes back and forth until we get to an agreement that a master plan that everyone agrees to. So the master plan, the draft copy has been included. It's about 71 pages. There's been some restructuring of it where this time, instead of putting all the background information at the front, we put the goals and objectives in the front, and the background information like data, housing data, population statistics, all that is now in the appendix in the back. That way it's more user-friendly. People, when they read the master plan, they want to get to, where we're headed, what are the goals? And so that's why we rearranged that. There's been some parts of the master plan didn't change much. Other parts changed quite a bit. Some parts of the plan were expanded, some were cut out or removed or reduced. But it's not a total rewrite. It's an update essentially. So, but there's 2 years of thought and work put into this. So we're ready for that final stages. And if we follow this plan right here, we're looking at probably about around April time adoption, unless there's some suggested major changes that come out of the public hearing or other meetings. So tonight I'm just recommending approving the master plan for distribution to require agencies to review this. But you also can have comment about the plan tonight and solicit public feedback from anyone that's here that wants to then talk about it.
I did a quick once over on it. Looks pretty good. I like the new format.
Yeah, that's one thing I noticed.
Right.
Well, moving the meat of the plan to the front
Yeah, it
makes a huge difference. You don't lose interest halfway through
Right.
the appendix, which it now is. So, yeah, I mean, seriously. No, the planning commission put a lot of effort into this,
Yes, they did.
getting it out for review. And now it's also available on the website, right? It's now public in the public domain. So everyone has a chance to read it, not for commentary.
Yep.
And how are we gonna encourage people to read it? How can we, 'cause that's a tough one, to get the public to read it and then come to the public hearing, so.
We can put a letter notice about it in the Harbor Light, put it social media on the website. Those are really the extent.
It's the same challenge we have.
I know.
Pretty much
I know.
any topic.
We don't horse to water.
I think the Harbor Light's a good idea, though.
Absolutely.
And let people, if they needed to have a hard copy, they could get one, because we've got folks that don't want to read them.
And anyone can submit comments. If they don't want to go to the hearing, they can submit comments in that 42-day period, or they can show up at the public hearing. So.
It looks good.
Makes a lot of sense. I'd make a motion that we release it for review as required.
Second. Public comment before we vote?
Okay, Nancy Rondell,
Yes.
Matt Bogira,
Yes.
John Cups,
Yes.
John Leo,
Yes.
motion carried.
All right. So I'm just scrolling for that.
It's rolling.
Okay, we can move on to the next item, which is item 3B, short-term rental program and ordinance changes. I was supposed to come to council in December with some suggested changes as that the planning commission had kind of gone through over several months, but didn't have the time then, so I bring it to you now. Basically, we looked at two different things here, really. I sat down with Jeff Graham, our zoning administrator here, and we kind of looked at the ordinance itself and then our process. The process for enforcement and for, I guess, being a little more efficient and expedient with how we approach potential violations. So with the changes to the ordinance itself, there's a few things that I'm recommending that we change. One is that we require the applicant to state their short-term rental maximum occupancy on an application form, and then, prohibit them from advertising for a greater number of occupants than they've stated on their application. I mean, we can't literally tell them they can't do this, but if we see that they're advertising for more people than they've said they can fit in their house, then we at least have one tool. Another option that Jeff had talked about was to create our own maximum occupancy limit for each house and then require them that they can't put any more on their advertisement for that number. So that's another alternative way to look at it as well. It puts a little more, the way I propose in here puts, it's a little more lenient. We can come up with our own number and say we only want 8 people or 10 people in a unit, but that's harder because you have to figure out, is it 1 per dwelling, per sleeping unit, 2 per sleeping unit? It's a little more harder to figure out some of those details. So that's one suggestion. We've provided a neighbor brochure that's just a draft. It can be edited in different ways, but as a starting point, and we'll put that in the ordinance that the owner must provide this be a good neighbor brochure to each of their renters. We would start the quiet hours earlier, instead of from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., 10 a.m. Sorry, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. It would be 10 p.m. And actually put a decibel limit on quiet hours, because right now when we get a call, and this is still something that's debatable, but if we get a call about a loud party or disturbance at nighttime, well, what's our measure? Right now it's pretty subjective for the police officer, but if it's something simple, whereas you exceeded the decibel limit at nighttime, it's a violation. Also, we can require the short-term renters' vehicles to park on the driveway or in the garage, as well as prohibiting them from parking on the yard. Clarify how long owners have to remove the trash and recycle bins. Right now, it's like you must remove it as soon as the trash has been picked up, but sometimes they come at 8:45, and what does as soon as it's been picked up means? I mean, 8:46, 9. So we put a time frame in there. Reducing the notice time to hold a suspension hearing. Before it was 21 days before of notice. Now he's lowered that to 14 days notice to hold a hearing. We also gave the city clerk the ability to suspend a license for up to 90 days after a first violation, instead of the original was 30 days. So it gives the city a little more leeway or authority to suspend that license for a little longer. And we also eliminated a suspension hearing for a second violation. Upon a second violation, instead of having to go to another hearing, the city clerk can decide whether or not they should revoke the license instead of going to another hearing. Or at least start that revocal process. And then finally, we put that a property owner with a revoked license cannot pull out another short-term rental license for 12 months. That way, for example, let's say you pull out your license, because our licenses are on calendar years. So let's say they violated it in November, the license technically expires on December 31st. So if we just revoke their license, they can apply again in January the next year. But this way we say, 12, you can't apply for a license for 12 months. Just it's a little more stricter. So those are proposed changes to the ordinance. Again, there's the Be a Good Neighbor brochure. This came out of the Planning Commission and our committee meetings there, and Bill Mulder had provided some samples what different communities do. And I have just a sample, and I want to change the pictures up in here, but it just basically says, this is for the renter. City Harbor Springs welcomes you. We're glad you're here, but please be on your best behavior. Here are some of the major nuisance issues that people might violate, usually noise, fireworks, pets and trash, parking. And then just letting them know that we have a 24-hour police service and that our police will respond and neighbors will complain if there's an issue. So something similar to this can be edited, based on, on changing needs, and we can have a better graphics, but it's pretty standard to what some other communities are doing. And then there's also the potential then for future changes. So these are some of the, I say, minor changes to fix some of the issues right now going forward, but the Planning Commission really wants to look at some potential major changes to the short-term rental that are actually affecting the character of the neighborhood. Right now, this is more of nuisance stuff or changes to the short-term rental ordinance, addressing potential problems, behavior problems. But the biggest concern from residents has been the character of the neighborhood and changing our residential neighborhoods into more commercial areas. And there's a few options for that. And one thing I noticed in doing my research is that really many different short-term rentals do fit the definition of a motel as defined in our zoning code. Our definition of motel, it's right up there on the screen. It says a building, whether detached or connected, is used as individual sleeping or dwelling units, primarily for transient automobile travelers. So some short-term rentals owners who maybe only use their house 2 or 3 times a year, they wouldn't fit this definition of motel because they're not primarily used for transient automobile travelers. But someone who has their short-term rental up all year long, as advertised, or maybe most of the year or half the year, they could be considered potentially a motel, because really they're just targeting their sleeping quarters to transient travelers. So there's some solutions that, first we got to really, look at, our definition of motel compared to how we define short-term rentals in our code. And we'll do that at the Planning Commission level if council wants to move forward with a review like this. But I've had some suggested solutions. One is to put a limit on short-term rentals, or put a limit between when a short-term rental is just a short-term rental and when it becomes a motel use. And I threw out the number 30. If you use your house for more than 30 nights in any given year, then you be considered a motel. Or it could be a greater number or a smaller number. It's just an example out there. Another potential option would be to require short-term rental homeowners to be on premise when their unit is being used as a short-term rental. That might not be as feasible, and also that's more of a bed and breakfast type. So you're maybe just changing from one definition to another definition. So I'm not sure about that one. I have to look into it some more. Or also only allow homestead properties to be used as short-term rentals. So that way, if you're homestead at Harbor Springs, you can use your house for a short-term rental, as opposed to having someone who lives out of state or downstate just buying a house up here to rent it out for short-term rentals. Again, there could be some complications and things we have to figure out with that. And I have to talk more closely with Jeff from the assessing standpoint about how easy that is to track and how we can enforce that. But those are some options. Al Dyke wasn't able to make it, but he did want to comment that he said that he believes also, he believes that we should potentially ban all rentals that are for under 30 nights. So he would want to even go stricter than what we're doing, suggesting here. But I'm not recommending any changes to that tonight. That's some food for thought on that definition of motel, for that to eventually go to the Planning Commission to decide on those and potentially other options, such as limiting short-term rentals in districts, or limiting the total number in the city. Of course, that all depends on what the state decides to do, but we're proceeding as if the state isn't going to pass any legislation. And if they do, then we'll deal with it then. So what I'm really recommending tonight is to discuss any of these ordinance change suggestions, and see which ones you'd like to go with. And I recommend then, if you guys approve many or some of them, I'll get back with Jim Raymer, our attorney, and present you at the next meeting with an actual draft ordinance for approval.
Now, these potential future changes would be topics that would be discussed at future planning commission meetings.
Yes, yep.
Good. I'm glad we're heading down that path. So,
I think the rule changes are good, gives us a little more
absolutely.
light to enforce things.
On the topic of limits to occupancy without a criteria, that seems kind of nebulous to me.
I think that we should have some criteria. I think something along the lines of establishing a number of people per bedroom. Some communities do it by per bedroom or per bathroom. I think, making some type of criteria along the lines of, we ask them to document on the application how many bedrooms they have. We then use that bedroom count to determine an occupancy level. And then that would be the occupancy level that and my thought on this is only to apply it to their advertisement of it. I think that's something that we can very clearly identify and look at their ad for their Airbnb or their VRBO. If we've documented that there's a limit of their occupancy of 8 and they're advertising for 12, that's a clear violation. I don't think we should apply this to knocking on the door and counting how many people are present, because there might be 4 or 5 people that are renting, but then also 4 or 5 people that are their guests that are having dinner there. And that would be very difficult to try and enforce.
That makes sense. Having a criteria that we can actually hold to, I think is critical. Now, we would require that they limit their advertising to that number. How is that going to be reviewed? Is that something that the service that we're paying for is capable of doing?
Yeah, the Harmari, the company that we're with, we have a website that we can log into. We can see the ads that the various houses are using. We can see it as of certain dates too. So if they've changed it today, we can go back and see how it looked a month ago to verify what they're putting on the websites for their use.
And then put the decibel limit of 50. I mean, I like the idea of reducing it, but what does our nuisance ordinance have today?
So our nuisance ordinance really says it's 70 decibels. It doesn't actually put a decibel limit for quiet hours. So we established quiet hours, but it keeps the decibel limit as the same decibel limit as it is during the daytime. So I figured, since we established quiet hours in our previous version of this, that we should at least distinguish between what decibel limit is quiet. And what I did, I searched just online. I'm not an expert in sound, but I searched out what other communities have done, and 50 decibels had been a pretty standard or common quiet hour decibel limit.
What are the implications of having a different limit for residents and renters?
Well, that's the same. It's just, the implications are, it gives us more ability to enforce problems that are at least real or perceived with short-term rentals. We've done similar things with the short-term rental ordinance with the trash. We have different regulations regarding trash with them and other things like that. So the same idea is that we want to be a little stricter on renters and short-term rentals, but.
Well, as long as we can do that, it makes sense, because the use is different.
It's a different use.
Yeah. So I just was wondering if there's an issue with having two different.
I can have, Jim Raymer will definitely double check that.
I don't know if Chief Knight has an opinion on.
What's that gonna do for the party every July on Lake Road, where we listen to a band till 2, 3 in the morning?
If it's outside outside the city or in the city?
It's in the city.
In the city,
It's a short-term rental.
if it depends, we'd have to determine whether they're.
No, it's a local resident. They're near, it's behind Patty.
This wouldn't affect them. This would we only have quiet hours for short-term rental.
5 hours for,
It could affect them if we got a call, because I believe they'd be above the 70 decibels of our normal.
Oh, yeah.
well, it's a little different than somebody having a jukebox, playing around a campfire. kind of thing.
Right. 50's pretty, I know it's a standard, but 50's pretty quiet. When I was doing the church study, the ambient sound with no, like nothing was like 43 to 48. The car goes by, it's up to like 70.
I'm kind of in favor of just leaving it at 70 myself.
Well, to just touch on an event like what you were talking about, we have another section of the code that talks about when you want to have an event with amplified music, because amplified music is not permitted normally in the city outdoors. So they just came into the city and just mentioned part of the, Victor's consent agenda topic or something and just included that in there. You guys could give them the ability to have an event like that individually. So there's still the option for something like that.
I mean, I think it's great that it's great music. So listen to it, but it's, well, I'm just thinking, I'm old school. I mean, we've had backyard parties.
Well,
Done
we
different
have
things. I mean,
a-
if the neighbor comes out and says something, you just go by. I mean, is it that big a deal that we need to go from 70 to 50 and start having bigger issues, or?
And we do have a nuisance ordinance, and we've talked repeatedly about, we've got ordinances that work if we enforce them. Is it worth having a separate category, 20 dB for renters?
I guess it's great we need to police this, but I'm thinking about over policing now,
Well,
a little bit.
I
Maybe
struggle,
addicted.
always have a little bit with different rules for different people.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand short-term rental people may not have the commitment to the community. I get all that. But I think too, when we make stricter rules on them than we hold our own local residents to some extent, we're sort of asking for trouble in one sense. That's just my own feeling, but I think 50 is pretty quiet.
Well, then for enforcement, you're gonna show up and you're gonna have to figure out, are you renting or are you
That's gonna be
living?
the first challenge, is determine whether they're running
Yeah.
or, but if we knew a house was a rental, then,
Yeah.
but it's still gonna be a challenge because what we could run into, which is what we run into our subdivision, is let's say that so-and-so is renting it to their cousin, but they're just saying, we're just staying here because this is our cousin's house. And are they actually paying payment or are they the cousin? That's where you run into an argument with this situation.
Right.
It's setting us up to fail.
I think we have an ordinance that, I mean, if this becomes the number one issue that we're dealing with rentals, we can always reconsider it. I'm hesitant to have carve out a section that is gonna provide, as many of these are, an enforcement issue. And I'm not sure we really need it today.
It is one of our more frequent complaints is nighttime activity and the volume.
But our current
But isn't
ordinance
that
doesn't
just
cover
people
that.
not wanting a rental sitting next to them, or, I mean,
Well, it could be a little bit of both. I think the idea behind having different regulations for each of them, and if we don't want to do it, that's fine, but I think the logic behind it is if I, as a property owner, have an event, more than likely I do that event once or twice a year. And when I do that, I probably reach out to my neighbors and say, hey, I'm having a barbecue this weekend, and maybe I even extend out an invitation to them to participate. Whereas when you have a short-term rental, it's probably more frequent with less notice to the neighbors that an activity is going on. So that's the idea behind, with that heightened level of activity comes a heightened level of potential
Should we
negative
just look
impact to
at
neighbors.
enforcing more of a fine?
We just
I mean,
have to
if you-
have, and I think that's the idea behind setting those decibel levels, is having a clear-cut idea of when we can say it's obvious that a fine should be.
My only question with
given.
the decibel is that he's gotta, or whoever's on duty has gotta catch him at that decibel level. So unless it's a stereo, blaring when they pull up, how are you gonna actually be able to police that? Unless it's just a bunch of guys in the backyard
Kyle, how do you do it
having too many
today?
beers, having fun.
How do you do it today, Kyle? Like if.
We'll get the decibel meter, or we'll just go, but if we're like, we don't carry our decibel meter with us, so we have to come back up. But I'll tell you what happened last summer, is the ones we had up on Summit, we had multiple calls, and Steve and Josh both went there a couple times, parked well away from it, walked up there on foot, and it
So they
wasn't.
can sneak up, basically.
It snuck up, and it wasn't, it might have been above 50 because 50 is pretty quiet, but it wasn't. But we also had one time where it was low.
And Nancy, I guess I see what you're saying. You view it as you don't want to regulate different people, hold different people to different standards, but I think it's more about holding different uses to different standards. One is being used as a permanent year-round home. One is being used as a a daily transient sleeping quarters. So I think that's a way of looking at it as opposed to looking at giving different people different rules, because there are different rules, decibel limit rules for CBD versus residential neighborhoods. And that's because it's a different use. But I do see where number 50 could be quiet. I mean, I see numbers pretty arbitrary. I mean, it's.
Do you have anything in the code that said that Kyle has a violation more than, say, 3 times? I mean, it's $200 fine, $500 fine
There is
for
something,
anything.
first,
above and beyond.
usually the first one is $250, the second one is $400. Depends on what part of the code, but usually there's a progressive.
Same thing, like
fine.
false alarms, same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, the short-term rental license has specific, here's how we do it, and then zoning violations, which may be separate from short-term rental stuff. It's a fine for each continued day that it's.
I don't have a problem with having different criteria for different uses, but especially the way that the chief described 50 dB. I think that may not be the right number.
I think we're nitpicking that one, but
It's a tough number to pick, though.
Yeah.
When you live next door to it.
So I have so far, everything's okay, but looking at establishing an occupancy limit and then reconsidering having a decibel limit number. Am I hearing?
As long as it's reasonable and enforceable, yeah.
What I'll do is I'll get our decibel meter out and do some reading just to see where we're at. I was down in church and there was nothing. It was like reading 40 to 43 to 48. So like a car pulls in the driveway, you're gonna be excess of 50.
Was that like during the day or in the evening? Like
That was like 10 and 11 during the day.
Okay, because I'm wondering how that would differ, because we're talking about the quiet hours would be after 10 PM, correct? Because I think the ambient noise might be lower.
I'd be curious just to see what chief has to say, about that, if you do a little bit of research on that. I'm just curious what your idea would be with that.
You're gonna have to enforce it, so.
Our biggest problem is gonna be trying to determine if they're renting or if it's a family member staying there. That's gonna be, I'll tell you right now, it's like, that,
Well, we should have that, we would have a list of what houses are short-term rentals, and then after the fact, or you can contact one of us, I know it's off hours, but to see if they're renting that day, we would have that
history on
Harmar or something, we'd be able to get that history from them.
We also talked about the idea of when we get the applications and approve them, just giving your office a copy so that you would have all of the information from that application directly available to you in your own files.
It still comes back to, I go there at 11 o'clock at night, knock on the door, and Johnny answers and says, well, my cousin lives here and I'm not renting, I'm just staying here.
It is a problem because the short-term rentals, some of them, they're only like, they might be on file as a short-term rental, but they only might rent out 5 days a year, 20 days a year, and it might be them, the owner's there. So if it's the owner there, then we have the problem of, all right, well, the owner's.
That's why the number really should be the same.
I hadn't thought of that. I go knock on the door because they're having a party, it's the owner.
Yeah.
Is the owner in violation of this? Oh, he's not, correct?
The way our ordinance is written is that when it's being used as a short-term rental is when.
Yeah.
So.
And I just don't think that makes sense. If it bothers the neighbor and it's the owner bothering the neighbor at 80 decibels, or if it's a renter bothering them at 80, it's still bothering the neighbor. I mean, so to ask Chief Knight to decide who's in the house that night and who's having the party, I can see that being a lot of hassle for 20 decibels, which probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference if somebody's complaining about noise next door. But that's something Chief really, he's the one who's gonna have to
We'll do some work
deal
on
with
it.
it. Yeah.
We'll do some work on that one. Are any other parts of the ordinance you just want to discuss before I have Jim Raymer draft?
So not the parking, I was just reading that.
I had a question about the parking. Can they park on the street?
For this, no.
If they can park on the street, if there is no driveway.
Yeah, we're not,
Yes, if there's no driveway
but we say they have to park in the driveway
or
or in
garage.
the garage, but not on the lawn, but we don't, or on the yard,
Yeah.
but we don't address street parking. And again, then how are we gonna know the ones parked in the street if they're renters' cars or visitors' cars?
I just wonder if there should be something about on property.
My concern with that would be if you get up in, Lake Park, there's no sidewalk, and a lot of people park with two wheels on the pavement, and two wheels on the grass, so that would be my concern.
Again, I guess the idea is similar to, it's going at the use, right? We have use regulations for parking in commercial areas where you must contain your, if they have a parking lot, a driveway, your cars must be on site. It's the same kind of concept of approaching the short-term rentals more, not as a residential house, but more as a, something in between a residence and a commercial activity. And
Well, in the red line in the item 5, you give the verbiage for that.
so, and I see where Councilmember Rondell is coming at, is that if regular residents are allowed to park on the street, right, then why can't short-term rental?
Well, and if you have short-term rental people that are having people for dinner, and those people park on the street, I just see it as an enforcement nightmare. I don't, unless Chief Knight knocks on the door and says, whose car is this, whose car is this, and that's unrealistic to ask that. I can see why we don't want them parked all over the yards. I get that. We don't like that anywhere. I understand that, but to tell them they can't use legal street parking to park, I don't quite know how we're gonna enforce that. I just don't see how we're gonna enforce that. And what are we doing with the downtown ones?
So that, in there, I put, if there is no driveway, for example, to account for downtown properties where they don't have, that they would be able to use on-street parking or lot parking.
It kind of goes to use, I mean, there are a number of rentals, short-term rentals on Summit Street, and there are days when you walk down and they're just lined up on the street, taking up, really narrowing the street, and there's no car in the driveway. So it gets to use.
I
It's
mean,
another one of those gray, do we want to have different rules for different activities?
Yeah.
And I think from an enforcement standpoint, and again, Chief Knight can comment, it's you use these criteria if there's a problem.
I know.
it's an extra tool. So for example, yeah, we might not be able to, get it right every single time. And sometimes, people are just going to get away with it. But at least if we have if we have something in
It's on
the
record.
language, it says, it's the same thing as speed limits. Like the cops aren't going to get everyone who's going 5, 10, 15 miles per hour. But the law, the sign is there, that there's a law. And you're not going to get everyone who's breaking it. So just because you don't enforce it all the time, does that mean you shouldn't have it? It's not, you can't enforce the speed limit in the city at all times. And Chief Knight knows that. There's going to be people speeding everywhere, people running stop signs, but you still have it on the books just in case you need to use it. And so you have it. It's a good control mechanism because it gets most people, 70 to 80% of people, about to comply. But I see the other standpoint where are we treating different people differently? We're treating different uses differently. Yeah, it is. I mean, we are treating different uses and different people differently.
Should be different.
And that's
Different use or homestead.
Different use.
It's a different use than a homestead, but I don't disagree with all of it, but I think we're setting ourselves up to have a lot of things on the books that we can't enforce. And we won't enforce unless there's a problem. And that's just sort of a strange concept to
Are
me.
you
I know
bored
we
with
do
your
it all
job?
the time.
Yeah, that's
But
just the way
it's
things
a
work.
strange concept.
So are you bored with your job?
What's that?
This is gonna make it.
As soon as we sit up here talking about this stuff, I asked Chief if he was bored with his job.
We'll do whatever. It's gonna be a challenge, because if you
It
have,
already is a challenge. It's just, how do we make it easier for you?
for example, Summit Street, at State Street this summer, there's 5 cars out there. We got a complaint from one of the neighbors saying that there was cars in the street. We'll come to find out it was somebody who lives there. They had their boat and their car in the street, so it's just, all of a sudden now we're offending the person who lived there. He said, why are you bugging me? That was his home. So that's where I see issues, but we'll deal with it. But I agree, it's a tool, but I don't want people abusing the tool.
But you have control of that.
Yeah, not by who calls.
That's true. That's true.
we'll put that as consideration to parking, to see if we can relook at that.
I have one more question. When you talked about the revocal process, is that what you said? What does that involve?
So the hearing to revoke a license is very similar to the suspension hearing.
Okay,
What city clerk would have to do is determine that there was another violation, a
Okay.
second violation, hold a hearing, let the licensee present their side of the case.
and do we have to give them 14 days?
Would be,
For
you'd follow
that-
the same process as a suspension hearing. I believe.
So if we have to give them 14 days for the first one and then can do the hearing, then 14 more days for the next one, if they had a second
If they had
violation.
a second violation.
So we're to over a month again.
Well, the way it works is 14, let's say June 1st, we found there was a violation.
Right,
We say your hearing's on June 15th for your violation. Let's say the clerk, we hold a hearing, clerk determines it's a violation, they're suspended for 60 days or 90 days. So then they can, let's say, so then they're allowed to start operating again in November. Let's say they violate again November 1st, then we have to send another notice that, all right, your second violation happened, we have to hold another hearing. So that notice period, 14 days, is give them enough time, A, to get the mail, to know that there's a hearing, and B, to prepare for it.
question. Okay, okay.
And we did one last year. We had one hearing, so
It went well.
it went well.
And you had something to say?
Or I can wait till public comment, whatever you like. My question was,
I think we're ready.
or not. What would you like?
That's fine.
It's about this topic, yeah.
Go.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Go.
So I might have missed something, but do we have a limit on number of cars per rental?
No.
Would that not make sense to say 2 cars per rental? Knowing that there might be times where there's more, but at least that would set the bar at a certain point where people might think twice about having 6 cars there.
Right.
We do have a limit in the zoning code for a number of cars that can be parked on site, not indoors. And that applies to all properties. It requires that if you want to park a vehicle outside of a garage, that it needs to be on a paved surface. Don't quote me on this, but I believe the limit is 4.
Nobody's gonna look that up, though.
We do not have then a limit to how many vehicles could be parked on the side of, on the street. We
I
allow
feel like
street
if you
parking.
had that in their little good neighbor thing, on 2 cars, per rental.
So are you suggesting that we have a maximum occupancy limit for persons per rental, that we also have a maximum car limit, vehicle limit?
I think you do that.
Yeah.
If you had 3 different couples coming to a house in town that housed 8, so you're each driving a vehicle, that's 3 cars.
Well, you could make them
Is there a
park one of
limit
them
on the
down
number of
here.
families in it?
Who's gonna want to,
Well, but I mean.
I've
you-
traveled quite a bit with groups. We're not gonna park 5 miles away and shuttle.
So, but if the only place they can
I've been
park
that
is
guy.
in a driveway that accommodates 1 car for the house or 2 cars in the driveway, then what's gonna happen to those other cars? They're gonna park them on the street.
Park on the street. Was at a house this morning for a
Which you're
meeting,
not
they
allowed
had
to
6,
do.
4 in the driveway, 2 on the road.
Mhm. But we're telling the short-term rentals that they're not allowed to park on the street. So we're setting ourselves up to make it impossible for them, which I don't think is wise. So if we limited vehicles and said, if you have more than that, one of them needs to be down here, or you can put them on the street.
But that's an unenforceable, that's a nightmare. It's an
So,
unenforceable restriction.
so how are we gonna keep them off the street though? If the driveway accommodates 2 cars and there's no garage and there's 4 cars that come to the rental.
This would allow them to park on the street because there is no driveway to park on because.
No, but the driveway's full with 2 cars. So that's,
What's the intent?
So if the intent is to reduce the amount, if we leave it as is, but just we take away the parking language that I put in there and then put in a maximum vehicle limit, they'll still be allowed to park on the street, but you're now technically reducing the number of vehicles that are on the street by putting a maximum limit on.
so you're saying, okay, maybe I'm not understanding. You're saying it's okay for them to park on the street if they fill the driveway up.
part of town you're in.
Well, but that's not what's in the ordinance.
No, that's not what, no, I'm saying, what's in the ordinance right now is they cannot park on the street
At all, no matter
unless they
what.
don't have a driveway.
Unless they don't have a driveway.
Right, yeah.
But if 4 cars come up and 2 of them fill the driveway up, they still aren't allowed to park on the street. according to the ordinance. That's what and I don't think that
Need some more.
doesn't
There's
make
something about
sense.
number of unrelated people that can be in a rental. No, okay. Just like the bachelor party thing, you know.
Well, if you have 4 couples that come up in a 4-bedroom house and they have 4 cars, which that happens. Those are the way the short-term rentals are used in a lot. We're setting ourselves up where they can't, if the driveway only takes 2 cars and we're telling them they can't park the other 2 on the street, I'm just confused about what we expect them to do.
So if the intent is to reduce on-street parking and ensuring that driveways are used,
Right.
then a little wordsmithing would take
We
care of
need
it.
to change the way it's written.
Another question I had too has to do with, like, are we gonna check number of bedrooms against, you know, the property description? Are you gonna do that or? Because another thing is like somebody has a basement with 8 bunk beds in it, and they can call that 4 bedrooms, you know? I think that,
We don't have a code, we don't have a fire code, we don't have anything in place in the
so there's
city,
no,
townships with nothing that can
Good enough.
warn you from
Yeah.
going on unless Kyle gets a complaint where he has to actually enter the premises. There's nothing in
could we
place
have
for us.
them like testify that they are not renting out space that, however we want to word it, you know, is in a basement that doesn't have egress, or I don't know. If there's one on our street, but I think they put 8 people.
There's no way of policing that.
You can put on their application.
Short of a physical inspection of the property to verify what's a legal bedroom and not, and I don't think we want to get into that at this point in time. We just don't have the staffing or the manpower to be doing inspections like that. I think to a limited extent, we have to rely on the information that we have at our disposal and the honesty of them filling out the applications and, you know, how many bedrooms that we have on a piece of property. So that's one limitation that we have, but I think the idea here is not to totally dictate control, but by requiring that they put something on their advertisement, we can kind of influence how many people might be interested in renting that property. If it's a group of 12 and they're looking for a home in Harbor Springs and they see a house that has, you know, stated right on their occupancy limit 6, they know that they're not going to fit that site. You know, there may be a few people that say, oh, we can throw some people on couches or something and whatnot, but I think most people will take that ad and tailor what they're looking for to. If that helps answer the question.
You got that direction? Or one more? The other Mulder?
Hi, Bill Mulder, 372 West Summit. I was involved this summer in the public input sessions on short-term rental. We had over 100 people there. And Victor, I think you picked up a lot of the responses that people had suggested, short of the macro solutions of limiting numbers, limiting, where they are, that kind of thing that are going to be, longer term, harder to analyze. So great job on that. I think it goes farther than, I envisioned we could, if this can become effective in 2022, which I think it can. So I think it's a great start. And in terms of the bigger existential questions, like Sue raised in her letter, the Planning Commission, at least last year's Planning Commission, was very willing to entertain discussions about the big questions. And we're meeting Thursday night. I'm going to be proposing that we tackle that early in the year to get it on the agenda and give it a good thorough discussion and maybe have another public hearing. So I just wanted to tell residents who are looking for something more that the Planning Commission is going to be where the action is over the next few months.
Thank you.
You know what you need?
No, I'll work on some things and bring it back.
Clean it up a little bit.
And just a couple notes about the current ordinance as it exists. We can, it says in there, we can request any information from the applicant that we deem necessary to approve. So there's that catch-all in there. And also it does allow the city clerk to inspect the premise if they need to. So we haven't ever done it because we, like Jeff said, we don't have the manpower. We're not gonna, go around just inspecting number of bedrooms because we just don't have the power. But if we need to, if there's a suspected violation, it gives us the authority to do that by signing up for this license. So we do have some catch-all phrases in there that allow us to do that if need be.
If you suspect that
Yeah.
something's going on.
Well, that's what I got. We're all good? Any other comments from council?
I think we're gonna do it in the right direction.
On Zoom? Looks like everyone's here for the administrative agreement review. All right, moving on to 3C, paid parking options. So I did get a couple comments about the title of this, discuss and finalize. So as you probably saw in my recommendation, there's certain parts of this I hope council can finalize tonight, but not the details, all the details. We'll come back in February to get a final plan to council once you get public input and provide your opinions. But basically, since November, the second November council meeting where we recommended presented different revenue options, paid parking was one of those revenue options, and council directed me to move forward looking to present some sort of paid parking plan. And since then, I've been discussing over the phone, Zoom, and in person with different paid parking vendors and contractors, people who provide paid parking stations, traffic parking experts, and as well as mobile app parking companies. A few questions that we wanted to ask first and was, what do we want paid parking to look like in Harbor Springs? And the first table you see here, the basic paid parking structure, really goes through what we want it to look like in Harbor Springs. The second and third tables are comparison of the different vendors that we've talked to. So I hope today we could, finalize some of this basic structure, and then also go with the vendors to start speaking with the vendors to actually bring a finalized plan to council with costs and locations of kiosks. I'll go through this. I'm sure you've read it, but as far as what paid parking looks like in Harbor Springs, our idea is a mix of pay stations and mobile app payment. I think it's pretty clear that no one wants actual individual meter spot. I mean, some might, but it's just not, it's too congested. It's not aesthetically pleasing. And so my recommendation after speaking with staff, and I've had Lucas Fenner's EDPW director, Kyle, as administrative assistant, Emily, we've all been on these conversations. And these are some of the things we've thought of. So no individual meters, but there would be a mix of pay stations, kiosks, as well as you can pay through your phone. Season, we're recommending a 6-month season, May 1st to October 31st, to capture most of the visitors that come here. Obviously, you could do it year round. You can choose specific months, but year round, we advised against it after talking with consultants because the monthly cost to keep them going versus the amount of people you have actually parking in those spaces is just not financially worth it. You shorten the season to maybe 2 months, then you're losing revenue, but revenue is only one of the goals. Obviously, we've had other goals about congestion downtown during the busy summer seasons, which is really just July, parts of August. So we got to look at our goals too, but revenue is one of our goals. So
Absolutely.
yeah, the days, recommending 7 days per week because we do have a lot of visitors on the weekend and our businesses are open on the weekend, so it makes sense. Some communities do Monday through Friday, some do Monday through Saturday, some do all 7 days. It's a mix. Historically, the reason why communities that didn't have paid parking on Sundays was because businesses weren't usually open on Sundays back in the day. And so there was really no congestion problem on Sundays. Hours, again, these are flexible. We looked at, the usage here is 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., a 12-hour time slot. It can be shortened to 10 hours or lengthened, however council pleases. But after talking with the consultants, it's not quite standard. Some places start earlier based on the kind of business activity they have going on. Some start at 7 a.m. and go to 5 or 6 p.m. We figured 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. would capture the different uses in Harbor Springs in the summertime. Location, there's a map I put in there, but it'd be almost the entire central business district, except for 3rd Street between Gardner and Judd, and the Methodist Church parking lot, as well as on the other lots. But it's mostly the entire central business district. Parking hour limits. So right now we have a 3-hour or 4-hour limit for where you can park, depending on the lot or the street. And we probably propose one consistent, even time limit, just to make it easier for enforcement. So 3 hours or 4 hours. But we also recognize that some people, the goal with this hour limit is to prevent someone like an employee from parking in a spot for 12 hours straight. So that's why you put a 3-hour time limit. But we don't want to prevent someone from coming for lunch at noon and then coming again at 6 p.m. for dinner, or coming for breakfast and then coming to shop later in the afternoon. So the idea is you could have different blocks. So like from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., you can park for 3 hours, and then from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. you can park for 3 hours. There's many different ways you can look at it. Parking rates, $1 per hour is pretty standard. Some places like Petoskey are at 50 cents an hour, but I talked to them, they're gonna hopefully move to $1 an hour, they said. Some other places, bigger cities, are more like $2 an hour. But for Harbor Springs, I think $1 an hour. So if you go less than $1 an hour, the convenience fees and the charges to the city and to the customer just don't make it worth it. Because if it's 25 cents to park in an hour, and then there's a 20 cents convenient fee, it just doesn't make sense. Number of physical pay stations, we're estimating between 15 to 20. Some of our consultants said, could go as high as 30 or more, or 15 on the low end. Well, we don't want to start out with too many, because we just don't know how people are going to use kiosks versus their mobile app. So if we put 30 kiosks out there and 60% of the people are using their phone and pay for it, you've kind of have, you've spent all that money in infrastructure when you didn't need to. However, if you deploy with too few parking stations, people might start complaining about, well, I have to walk half a mile just to put in my license plate. It doesn't make sense. So you want to strike a balance between where the future is going with phones, but recognizing that we also have still a demographics, an older demographic that still doesn't use their phones to pay for things. And there's some statistics that the companies have provided us showing that older demographics, use their phones less to pay for parking. So, but since we're targeting the summer crowd, most of them are, families are younger or older, and they're using their phones to pay, as evidenced in Petoskey or other place. I talked to Petoskey there, and they said over the 5 years, it's been exponentially increasing the amount of people paying by phone as opposed to by paying by meter. So it's increasing, but I still think we need some sort of mix between pay stations and app. So again, some notes, a pay station would be pay by license plate. So you would have to know your license plate number. You would go in there and you would type in your license plate, and for however long you want to spend, an hour and a half, and you don't have to go back to your car to put a ticket on the windshield or anything. Your license plate is in the system. We also recommend that the pay stations accept credit card and coin, but not actual dollar bills. After talking to vendors, they have the option for dollar bills, but they tend to jam really easily, cause problems and malfunctions in the machine. It's just much easier to pay with coin or credit card. If we were doing like higher limits, like $5, like parking lots, if we had a separate parking lot that was $20 to park all day, then sure, it would make sense to have accept dollar bills, but we're not proposing that. And then there's signage. Of course, we'd have to have signage up that says where the parking zones are, where they can go to pay by app. So there would be increased signage. We do have the infrastructure already. You can post it on poles or whatnot. And so this is hard to see because the program I was using only had red, but the bright red is showing you where the zone would be that we're just proposing right now. So there's 3rd Street between Gardner and State, Main Street between Gardner and State, Bay Street between Gardner and State. Actually, Main Street goes all the way down to Judd. Then a little bit extended on Main Street and Bay Street to where the commercial businesses are. So right here by Bay Street, you have it to Depot, and on 3rd Street all the way to, I think, Rocky's Ice Cream, the Harbor Ice Cream store. Then also the 2 lots. One is where these red dots are, the pier lot and the Harbor Master parking lot. That would be paid parking, and so would the Gurney's lot up here on Third Street. The Methodist Church lot over here, we would, it would stay free. We have an agreement with the church, and I just think it would be too convoluted to have make that paid parking. The Third Street and Spring Street lot up here would still be free parking. So would on Third Street here, that spot over there, and then everything west of here would be free parking. So that's so that's the first analysis. The second analysis was of the different vendors. So looked at 2 actual vendors for pay stations and kiosks and the back end software related to that. One was IPS, which is a California-based company that they have regional offices in the Midwest, and they do a lot of business in the Midwest, but they're California-based. There's only one Michigan-based that we knew of parking, paid parking consultant or company, and that was Traffic and Safety. They're downstate in Wixom, I believe, Oakland County or near there. So a little comparison, the upfront costs, Traffic and Safety provided 2 different models, types of things, one for about $9,500 per station, another for about $12,000. IPS has one for about $9,000 per pay station. So between the 2 of the models, they're relatively similar costs, except for the higher end model for Traffic and Safety. Traffic and Safety definitely had a better understanding of the needs. They've actually worked with previous management here on potential parking plans, and they actually visited up here multiple times. I don't think IPS really had quite a solid understanding of our city's needs. They were simply using Google Maps to figure out, parking circulation, and clearly they had some things that right. The products, Traffic and Safety offered multiple pay station products and different solutions for us. IPS only discussed one option. So there's that. Reviews. Everyone I talked to, and there's about 4 or 5 municipalities, positive reviews from people about Traffic and Safety that have used their services. I've had mixed reviews from about IPS. Some of the, I would say the negative feedback about them was, it seems like they're designed their products to do well in the South or in the West, but not in Northern Michigan conditions. So that was just, there's a lot more.
These are actual users. These are municipalities that have installed it and used it.
Yep.
Good.
Monthly recurring costs, minimum $55 per pay station for Traffic and Safety. And John, you pointed out that I had an unfinished sentence there. That rate could change if we add more features to the pay station. You add the changes. IPS had $55 per pay station, but I'm not sure if that's just the minimum price. They didn't explain that to me. Other for Traffic and Safety, their training is included. They have a 1-year warranty on their products, and they'll drive up here at no cost to us to solve problems. For IPS, the after install support is minimal. I asked them that question, would they be willing to drive up to us if something broke down? They said no. We have tutorials online that you can use. So it just didn't seem the same kind of customer service. It makes sense because they're not based in Michigan, so obviously it's going to cost them $1,000 to get out. So I get why, but it's
They don't have a local presence. Yeah.
And then we looked at the 2 different pay by app vendors. And one is Passport and one is Park Mobile. So Passport has a cheaper convenience fee, which is to the customer. So per transaction, it's a 25 cents. So no matter if you put 25 cents in the machine or put for 3 hours, $3, they'll be getting charged a 25 cents convenience fee if they pay by phone. Park Mobile's was 35 cents. Now, Park Mobile got back to me afterwards, after I guess people have been talking in the parking world that paid parking might become Harbor Springs, and they want to try to compete with Passport. They said they can shift those costs around, but either it's going to shift more to the city or more to the customer. So it's if they take away from the customer fee, it's more to us. If they take away from our fee, it's more to the customer. So it's not quite a win-win, but the merchant's transaction processing fee, which is to the city. So that's the fee that they have to actually process the transaction and communicate with the banks. Passports is a little bit less, 2.5% plus 20 cents per transaction, whereas Park Mobile's is 3% plus 20 cents per transaction. Presence, they're both are highly present in Michigan. And Passport is the second largest paid parking app in the country, while Park Mobile is the largest. And actually Park Mobile is in Petoskey and Charlevoix. Passport's not, but Passport is in places like Sault Ste. Marie and other places in the southern west side of the state. Enforcement app, this is one of the real things that really matter to us, is that Passport has an app that communicates with the traffic and safety kiosk. So when our police officers are going there to see if someone has paid for parking, that app will pull all the license plate numbers that have been plugged into the kiosk, and it'll communicate with the app. So that way, all Kyle's people have to do is start typing a license plate number to see if that person has paid either by app or by kiosk. Park Mobile doesn't have that. Their information will go to the kiosk, and then from the kiosk, you print out a list. Whereas this way, that kiosk information goes to the app, and they just have to use a mobile device to start typing in. They can just type in the first letter of the license plate, and then all the cars that have that letter are show up in that.
So this is just a smartphone app that you
Yeah.
use to check.
Yeah, basically an enforcement, they have a separate enforcement app.
Okay.
Signage, they both provide free signage. They help us design signage with us, and so that's obviously a good thing. App features, this is kind of relative. I think Passport's generally easier to use, but I definitely think Park Mobile has more features. It integrates better with Google Maps, so for the customer, there's that advantage. And both of them have validation, allow stores to pay for a customer's parking. It was pointed out in a public comment that you have that this could lead to business owners validating their own employees' parking. And just concern that they might have with that. So based on all that, my recommendations, if we're going to choose vendors, when we get to that point, would be to go with Traffic and Safety and Passport. The first strongest one is the compatibility between Passport and Traffic and Safety. Their pay stations on the back end, and actually Passport and Traffic and Safety, and they're smart. They've teamed up together. They're working on developing a back end from our office thing. So the Passport's purchase, all the transactions that goes through Passport can be integrated into Traffic and Safety's back end system when we look at trends and who's paid. So they're working together in that sense. So I think that's the biggest seller for me and for Chief Knight and some of the other staff. Passport enforcement tool is also simple to use. As I said, you just type in the license plate. That makes it so much easier for the cops than having to print off a list or do something else. Traffic and Safety is a Michigan company with more immediate response and service. I like that. Traffic and Safety offers a better pay station product, as evidenced in discussions with other communities. No one that I've talked to had a bad thing to say about their actual pay stations. Passport has a lower customer convenience fee and a lower merchant transaction processing fee, so that's a positive. And I think the price between Traffic and Safety's products and IPS is not significant, because what we're ultimately looking at for is our return on investment. So, it might cost us, $150 or $200 or $250,000. We just might see a return on investment a little bit longer, like a year and a half or two, as opposed to a year or something. So that's really the
Democrats are upset with the White House over testing shortages.
Yeah.
I think I could go on, but I mean, is there any? It's a bad week for the president. Is there any way?
So much news.
On the fee structure, that's a flat fee regardless of volume. That's just the cost.
For the Passport and the parking app, yeah, per trans. Are you talking about the convenience fee?
Yeah, but
Yep.
it's
Per transaction,
irrespective of volume.
irrespective of volume. Yep. So I guess my recommendations are there. For tonight, it's basically to, I guess, talk and finalize that basic structure that I've talked about in the table, as well as picking a vendor. And then once we pick vendors, we can then come back with a specific plan on specific kiosk locations, specific kiosk type, total costs and agreements and contracts, and other details council wants finalized. We put a lot of work into this because it's what council wanted to go forward with, but of course, public, we've put it in the newspaper ahead, and now I believe we have a lot of people from the public here that want to comment and they might have some concerns. Some of the concerns we have had that I've heard from people have been about the aesthetics and charm of the town, that they feel that parking meters, and I've tried to explain to some people that parking kiosks a little bit different than parking meters, but some people do have that concern. Others feel that, they've paid taxes for this, and why do they have to pay, if they're local owners, why do they have to pay, to now to park here? My, I guess, response to that is that, well, that tax money that you've been spending now on parking and all those other things are gonna be freed up to do other things. So that's a response there. But there's a lot of people, have a lot of comments, as we can already see on chat, we have a few, so. But I guess leave it up first to council, and then Mayor, you can open it up to the public.
Pretty happy with what you have laid out there.
Nice job with the detailed information, the research, talking to municipalities. You summarized it in a really easy to understand trade-off matrix. That's really well done.
Yeah,
I
pay
agree.
structure is fine, 6 months.
It all makes sense to
No
me.
problem. I'd pay $1.50 to do my banking with ASCII a week.
There wouldn't be no
Makes sense.
transaction fee. There wouldn't be no transaction fee to the customer if they paid by kiosk, of course. It's only by.
Right, well, I'm just
app.
saying, it's only
the app.
Yeah.
My business is in Petoskey, I mean, gotta,
Yeah.
if you go in for an hour, I guess,
It's
what 50
part of-
cents is.
it's Part of the deal.
We'd also recommend,
I've never used the passport
got me
yet.
thinking here, that we recommend removing the actual kiosks in the wintertime. They're easy to uninstall, just because they can get damaged and.
Vandalized,
and-
whatever.
Well, deteriorate through the winter conditions, so, you can leave them out, but, salt and all that, so our DPW said it'd be no problem to take down the signs and then store the kiosks in the wintertime and then put them back out in May. It's really no problem.
No problem with it.
I'd say the timing, maybe 9 to 9 instead of 8 to 8. There's not a lot of
Most of the
activity,
stores are open till 9,
yeah, 9 or 10.
and that would catch the dinner time hour better for some people too.
Right.
I mean, we might actually make more money
Make
doing
more
it that way.
money.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good one.
that's a good point.
That was the only real thing that stood out to me.
Appreciate all the work on it, Victor. I think overall it looks great, and I think,
Aesthetically, it's not gonna hurt anything.
no. And the flexibility of it, we can try it this way for the first year, and we want to tweak it, then we can tweak it the next year. You can change the times or even where the paid parking is if we need to,
And
so.
you could always do more if you wanted different zones for lots, if we determine that
Right,
one lot should pay more or should have different hour limits, we could always go there. But right now, we want to see how it works with one zone because we're new to it.
When you come back with a more detailed plan and specific locations for the kiosks, we have a better chance of saying, is that enough? Is that too many? Is that too few?
Well, the ad for Kyle, I was curious how that worked, so, I mean, the ad for these guys to.
And my plan is, the Sioux has actually both Park Mobile and Passport, right? That's what we were
The
told.
Sault Ste. Marie, yep.
Yeah, so I'm gonna try to take a day trip up there next week, just to pick their chief's brain.
Yeah.
And, I was just at a conference, and we talked about parking extensively in our little long time, so I'll have a lot more grasp on. Victor and I appreciate him, our input or allow me to have some input. We've had some good meetings on it, so. And that app with the, not having to print it out at the kiosk is, and when we got our demonstration, to be able to type in like if your license plate is 80K, once we get to 80K 52, it'll show us if it populates or not. Makes it much easier.
Absolutely.
Yeah, print, I don't think a paper printout is really
We're
viable.
chasing our tail around.
You can't do that.
Yeah, trying to match up license plate numbers with it.
no, that's,
Should use the technology.
yeah.
No, this is one of those things that's not gonna make everybody happy, but it's the way we have to. But
John, you can't make everybody happy.
then we gotta-
Not gonna get it one hand.
Well, and at least to talk to each other too, makes a good
Right.
down the road to be able
The
to get some
integration is
data.
great, and
Yeah,
if they're really working as a partnership to integrate the back end, that's just a
that's
win.
even better, yeah.
That's it. Time for comments.
You want to go to in person first and then Zoom, or?
Pass.
I won't laugh.
Well, let's do the people who came to the meeting. Anyone in there? There we go.
Here we go. Not a surprise.
First winner.
I thought it was a great analysis too, if we do have to go forward with it. I gotta say, I'm not a big fan. I was just talking to Rachel, what are we gonna do at the beach if that's free parking? Are people gonna go to the beach,
We actually,
We're gonna go to the beach anyway.
we've had this discussion
Yes.
extensively, because right now, with the way we're doing it, the beach fills up automatically right up the pad anyways.
First thing in the morning.
Yep, because all the people that work downtown, I mean, there's still people that park at the beach that go to the beach, but unfortunately, there's people that work downtown that park at the beach. I agree with you, Dan, for the end of that, but that's the way it's gonna be. It's unfortunately, it's that way right now a little bit.
Another question is, did you say Spring Street parking lot was not gonna have to be metered?
No, that would be free.
Why would that be free?
Um,
Isn't that where everybody would just zoom to in the morning?
Probably.
Wouldn't we include it though? I mean, why wouldn't we include that?
I mean, part of the reason was you still want to give enough spots for people to park in the outer line areas of the CBD.
We discussed permits there, like a permit parking, and it was like, I'm not opposed to anything.
Yeah.
But we
that-
discussed what,
We
Yeah, I
drove
remember.
around.
Yeah,
it's just, we're limiting, I guess our thought was, at least it's somewhere for the employees to park downtown. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying, when we looked at the map, and pretty much now they have West State Street, or it's gonna be West Main Street, and they have Third Street, and then they have the east side, that it was like those 15 spots. And it's up to council, when we looked at those 15, because we could create some money out of it, believe me, if we had paid parking there.
When staff, I guess when the DDA and staff looked at this in 2017, 2018, they really only limited to Main Street and I think Bay Street paid parking. So we're actually expanding it because then the goal was just to get people out of Main Street and Bay Street to park in the outer line areas. Well, we've expanded into more also a revenue making thing, so that's why we even expanded it further. So we could expand it, keep on expanding, where's the limit do you want to stop at? So that's kind of what we talked about the beach, like to expand it that way. We talked about going all the way to Judd on Third Street. And so, I mean, you can keep on expanding it, but at some point, we got to remember that there's a revenue making it, and there's also preventing residents who live here from parking anywhere. The way we have it right now, it's essentially at most a half a mile from anywhere to pay for or to park in somewhere free. So
Victor, on a typical block, then, like how many signs would be added?
that's what we have to figure out. That depends on, depends on Wayne, how much we think people will actually be paying attention to what's there versus how many, complaints and how much it's gonna come back to bite us in the butt, staff, right? So like if we had one sign, you enter Harbor Springs, you've got to pay for parking. It's not gonna do it, right? But then if you have a sign every 5 feet, obviously we're gonna get a lot of complaints about that. So it's kind of finding that balance of how much signage is enough for people to know that they have to pay for parking. So we can't come to Kyle and be like, I didn't know I had to pay for parking.
This is sort of a reflection of short-term rentals. We've had more complaints this winter about downtown parking on the street and us writing tickets overnight than we ever have. And it's because there's more short-term rentals downtown, and most of the time it's been local, so they know to get their cars off the street. This winter, we've had so many people complain, and we haven't posted at all the city limits, but you don't have signs. And we've never had that issue of, minimal amount. This year it's been nonstop.
Yeah, because we have no parking overnight from December to April, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Well,
So
but
the
this is,
signage is huge.
this is another variable. You come up with a plan, you'll suggest placement of signs, we'll put up some signs and we'll find out if we feel it's too much or too little. You gotta start somewhere.
Yeah, we could all, exactly.
Let's
that's
find
it.
out.
And the Spring Street lot is, that's your guys' place on that.
It seems like if we're going a block north of Third Street and State, why not go a block north on Spring?
I'm under the impression we should do one across from the Legion and Spring Street, leave the church alone. Then we cover all downtown, then we don't have to worry about it.
So you're saying to do Spring Street lot?
Because those are the two free parking areas right now, Spring Street lot and the one across from Legion.
But those will be the ones that, well, they're always full. I don't know about the one up behind.
They're always full.
Spring
They're
Street.
always
But the one across from the Legion is always full.
Go all in.
So
That, just one more thing, because I'm proud to be quiet, take more than my 5 minutes. This is a big deal. Do you think there ought to be a public hearing? I know it wouldn't be a lot of fun, but I mean, when people complain about, not having a chance to have a voice.
Well, we got plenty, I mean, we got a lot going on,
Oh,
plenty of time to make comments and do different things, right?
well, yeah, I mean, this is a public meeting. It's,
And a public hearing of sorts.
yeah, it's a public, I mean, I don't think a hearing is a good word for it. I mean, if you're talking about a separate public meeting just to talk about paid parking, that's up to council, but I mean, we have it on the agenda. So,
Well, and when you come back, it'll be on the agenda
Yeah.
again.
And I think too, a lot of what's driving this is we need to come up with revenue streams. And you were at the budget meeting, so you know what we did this year to buy us a year, but we're not gonna have that option next year from the historical fund. So we need to look ahead and figure out a way to make ongoing revenue. And for me, this makes a lot of sense because it shares the cost with locals as well as folks that use our town. So we're always gonna have people who don't like what we do. I mean, that's just a given. And I don't love it. I mean, I love to not have to pay to park, but I also understand the city can't run without revenue.
It's gonna cost you $1 to come down and have lunch or dinner.
And it's also a significant revenue stream from non-residents.
Exactly. It's a shared, sharing of the expenses, which I think is a really healthy way for a resort town to do to get revenue.
Next one.
Quick question,
Yeah,
Kathy
you're
Macho, right, 560 Sergeant Street. Maybe I missed it in there. What are the best estimates of the revenue, or was that too soon to ask, or?
so they have, I've gotten different revenue projections and they're in here, some of them, but a lot of it depends on, again, occupancy, like really estimating what our occupancy rate is. Like, are we going to be at 40% occupancy, 50%, 60%? Conservative estimates put paying it off at a year to a year and a half at most. Revenue could be up to $300,000 plus if we are at like 80% occupancy during those high peak months.
Per season.
Yeah, per season, yeah. So,
Wow.
yeah,
It's very
it
significant.
could be up to 10% of our general fund expenses it could cover,
Wow.
so, yeah. And Petoskey, I should say, they have about, I would say 2.5 more times metered spaces, and their revenue is about $900,000 off of like 50 cents per hour. So, I mean, if you do the math, I mean, it's really, if we could be even closer to well above $300,000 for.
And this money would go into the general fund.
It would be
correct?
used to cover general fund. I mean, Nick Clerk Whitaker would set up a separate fund, but it would be to cover general fund expenses.
Primarily parking and law enforcement.
Yeah.
Are two of the biggest general fund expenditures, yes.
Parking lots and infrastructure related to parking. So basically you use paid parking for revenue stream to cover costs associated that not only for the parking lot itself, but for those people who are parking there, the facilities and infrastructure they're using. So let's say they're using Marina Park, right? It's helping, to make some improvements, landscaping improvements, to Marina Park. Part of that would be covered from the user by paying that $1 an hour that they paid. It's a theory behind it.
Bill Mulder again. I definitely get the revenue implications and what we're trying to do. I definitely get the macro picture. This is something I hope we don't have to do. It makes sense to hold it this year and let residents know that this is something that we're likely going to have to do if we can't increase our revenue in other ways. So it could be part of the discussion about, if we're going to do a separate millage or a couple separate millages of another way that, if that's not acceptable, then, we are going to have to go with parking. So maybe we don't pull the trigger this year. So that's a thought. The other thought is if we have to pull the trigger this year, could we do it in stages and do kind of a trial where we do most of Main Street with, 6 kiosks or something, minimal investment. And, let's try it this summer and see how it fares and see what people think about it. And instead of having to go in whole hog with a multi-$100,000 investment. 2 thoughts.
Could I just ask what the concern is, why you don't feel we should pull the
Yeah,
trigger?
I was just thinking about thanks, Jen, about the reality of pulling up to the post office, to drop off, or pulling up to the pharmacy to pick up a prescription, or going to the bank. Those are, 5 and 10 minute trips, hopefully, and going to the beach too. Really, it would be great if we didn't have to do this. We do have a quaint feel. It is really special. And, residents do use the services downtown too, and we want to be respectful of them. I think a lot of people are going to have a hard time with the mechanics and the new tech, and it's going to be a bit of a jolt. So I think it'd be great if we didn't have to do it, and maybe it's something that we could hold out as something that would have to be done in the future if there's not other revenue solutions.
Thank you.
Sue?
Interstate Street, I really agree with Bill. I think a lot of people are going to be really shocked, locals, when they go downtown and see parking meters, even the people that come seasonally. I think it's going to be a really big shock. And it really does change the character of a cute little town. Like it just makes us different than Petoskey and Charlevoix. I mean, I don't know, I think that's what's special about us. And I agree, running into the post office and to think you have to think again, and probably I'd forget to put money in the meter and get a ticket. Would there be a way to do it just in the summer? And then,
That's what we are doing.
oh, it wouldn't be in the winter or fall?
I'm proposing 6 months, May through October.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, that's a plus. But I really like the idea of either not doing it or starting small. Just my opinion.
Carol Leonard at 141 Snyder Street. I understand the concept of not wanting the parkings, paid parking, but I think it'll also send a message to the residents here that it is a revenue issue. Because I've been at a lot of the meetings and there aren't that many people that show up. And if you look at the last 4 or 5 years of the budgets, the city has operated in a negative position. And then this year, Nancy, to your point, found the money in a reserve fund and moved it over. And I think this will send a message and get people paying attention to the issues about the revenues here.
The one thing I forgot to share, we can no longer chalk. So that type of enforcement is not going to be available this year or next year. It's one that it's been ruled against. So even though we did it last year, we will not be able to do it this year. There's other means we can do it, but it's much more taxing and manpower. Just to let everybody know.
Anyone else?
I'm sorry, Chief, I didn't understand. What can't we do now?
The chalking of the tires, which we've done, is
Okay.
our Sixth Circuit judge is ruled against it.
Okay.
Move on to Zoom.
Yes.
Okay, let me. Okay, get to the top there. So all right. Merritt Keffer, parking pay stations will be an eyesore in our beautiful little town. What kind of revenue do you expect to gain by doing this? Is it worth it? This will also cause more people to park. This will also cause more people to park in the neighborhoods and walk, so residents will have to deal with more traffic on the once quiet streets that border the business district. I am not sure this is the best way to generate revenue. Barb Rose, can you please explain the need for paid parking? Is it for revenue? Will it go to the general fund, or is it earmarked for a certain thing? I personally believe you are ruining the small town feel. iPhone, I don't know who this is, so I'm not going to read it. Please, we'll read comments where people have their name, and so we know who's speaking. Merritt Keffer, I would think you generate some decent revenue from parking tickets, and that doesn't require an expenditure on new hardware. Marinda Miller, has there been any consideration whatsoever in how this will impact the seniors in our community? We have an enormous senior population. Many have been here for generations and have built this town. asking seniors to remember their license number and or use their phone to load time or own a smartphone most likely will not be conducive. Furthermore, the current wayfinding signs that are nothing more than eyesore and now more urban signs with parking zones information will continue to take even more of Harbor Springs charm away. Our city charm is quickly fleeting. Why don't you try to pass this agenda in July when most of the Harbor Springs taxpayers are in town? Margaret's iPad, those that need to travel to Petoskey is due to necessity errands and the benefit are the visits to other shops. Makes sense for paid parking. Call it kiosk or meter, same thing. For Harbor Springs, it will be only restaurant and theater visits. 3rd Street to Judd will be heavily impacted with no solution to prevent the overflow. BAK, I think this is one of the worst ideas I've ever heard from Harbor Springs. I completely agree with the comment from Keffer and Saul. Miller, keep our town charm. I can't imagine what our merchants must think. This is a horrible and I'm sad you were considering it. Please don't be greedy and make this vote on money. Merritt Keffer, I would like to see a comparison between the income from current, I already said that one. Mary Lee, as a summer resident of Harbor Springs, I'm disappointed to hear the city council appears to be ready to proceed on this paid parking plan. We visit Harbor Springs for the charm and the feeling of a trip back in time to a more simple time. We love the small town experience of spending time in Harbor Springs. I'm extremely concerned that parking kiosks will add even more visual clutter to the town. We do not want to have to click on our phone or find a parking kiosk every single time we visit town to go to a farmer's market, get a sandwich at Gurney's or get an ice cream cone. Agree with other comments that the wayfinding signs are unattractive. The parking kiosk will add more clutter and burden to people visiting town. How do the merchants in Harbor Springs feel about the plan for paid parking? Brenda Miller also has spoken with many merchants in Petoskey. Their take on the parking is that it has ruined their community and impacted their customers with horrible inconveniences. They get constant customer complaints. One merchant went as far as to say that Harbor Springs would be making a big mistake, mainly because Harbor Springs is not Petoskey. Merritt Keffer, I think before moving forward with this, you really need to do a clear revenue analysis. How much money will you make via paid parking versus the money already made by parking tickets? Carrie Kay, as a sailor and a vacationer in Harbor Springs for over 50 years, I want someone to remind council that the parking tickets that were issued during the regatta sailors almost killed the race. Boat owners could not get their crews to come to Harbor Springs because of the ticket during the races. You are making the exact same mistake, but on a much larger scale. You're going to kill the farmers market and dining by ticketing visitors. One ticket and people will not be back. You'll have a huge revenue problem once this occurs. Tim Knapp, the DDA looked at it and we found no residents want paid parking. 1 minute you were worried about how many cars are on Summit Street due to renters. Now you are going to push cars on that street so people can avoid paying parking and they will walk. Mary Lee, paid parking would discourage people from visiting your cute town for quick visits to pharmacy, pick up a sandwich, or for an all-day visit to walk around and shop and spend the day in town. Karen Stroud, this discussion should be brought in to discuss where will the revenue come from if it's not this way. Debbie, this really needs to be discussed with the local residents and our community. I think we are not honestly going to realize that much revenue versus damage to our charming town. Yes to a public hearing. Mary Lee, what about Ford Park? We have to pay to park there. We buy an annual launch permit for Ford Park. We will also need to pay to park at Ford Park each time, ? Or will the park be even more busy because non-voters park there? Merritt Keffer, what about the new revenue from the new houses being built that will generate massive taxes? Yes, a public hearing, and maybe it's time to look at other revenue options. We're not Petoskey and this idea ruins our charm. Carrie Kay, so this is to cover the police department. Karen Stroh, we all need to recognize that the city needs to raise revenues. We don't have a lot of options. Margaret, again, we're not Petoskey and the business designation is not the same as Harbor Springs restaurants. Sorry, I lost myself there. Restaurants are going to be hit the hardest. Kiosk parking. Nadia El-Maghrabi, I have posted paid parking in Harbor Springs. What do local residents, summer residents, and merchants think about this? Everyone affected needs to be consulted. Debbie, I totally agree with looking at other revenue generation options. Not sure this is the answer. Please don't pull the trigger on this idea hastily. Mary Lee, agree with the current speaker that paying to park is burden for quick trips. BAK, current speaker, spot on about his thoughts on quick trips. He is well spoken and representatives who disagree. Thank you. Tim Knapp, Bill Mulder has a, what's that again? Bill Mulder has a good idea. To look at other options, especially if city residents do not want it. I came from St. Joseph and it's much bigger, but not paid parking, keeps the charm and character. It could hurt businesses and restaurants. Why not go to State Road or Rodrigo's if they have to pay? A good solution to show what we'll have to do if we don't pass a millage or some other means. Kathy D. Sarkey, what other revenue options have you explored? So those are the comments from
One thing I'll
online.
say,
Obviously, nobody's paid attention the past year.
I was just gonna say.
But that's not atypical.
go ahead, sir.
Rick Tarczynski, 465 State Street. I just want to throw in that I was very disappointed when I saw that Charlotte put up meters. I thought it made the town look hideous. And I usually stop there and shop or eat all the time when I go down to Traverse City or any other errands down that way, doctors. And I haven't stopped since they put those meters up. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that doesn't like to pay meters and go right by. So we need to think about that too.
Doesn't stop me from going to Petoskey and having a beer and lunch and stuff like that. I mean, it's $1. I mean, what?
So Tim Knapp is on the DDA.
Irritating as hell.
He mentioned that, but when I went to the DDA meeting a few months ago, it seemed everyone there was all for some sort of paid parking, so.
That's when they thought they could get the revenue.
There is alternative to us, Chalk, there's systems that we could purchase, just let me make you aware.
Right.
Well, answer this question. The handful of parking tickets you hand out, does that equal $300,000 a year?
No.
Exactly. So.
That's bad.
Sue Winter again. I have an excellent revenue source driving right by my house every day, speeders. Could money be raised by actually enforcing the speed limit instead of parking?
We don't collect money. We write a fair amount
Oh, it's free, it's speed?
no, we don't, the city doesn't collect the money. The amount that the city collects out of speeding tickets is minuscule.
But that's because they're not giving money. I mean, it's just an idea.
So
It'd be
to,
good revenue.
to give out more speeding tickets, we have to hire more police officers to have more patrols.
We could write, if you want us to write tickets for people 5 over, we could create a lot of revenue. If you look at what happened in St. Louis when they had the riots down there, that's what got them in trouble. It was try to enforce money, try to enforce the law to raise money. I'm not, and I'll address your name, but I'll put people on your street.
Maybe 10 over, 15 over. I don't care about 5 over.
Yeah. But we,
Just an idea.
Yeah.
No.
We'll work on it.
More time.
More time.
Yeah.
Could we not just slow down a little bit and look at the option of trying to pass a millage for public safety and parking?
We don't have time. We've been through this. You've been in on the budget
What do you
meetings.
mean we don't have time?
If we don't do
Well,
something
second
now,
this year.
come fall, when we want to do budget and do stuff, we're not gonna be able to do it. I mean, this is we've been talking about this for over a year. This isn't anything new.
The risk is, what if the millage fails, then it's a risk.
Then I guess we
Then
can.
next year, we're out.
But I think if you let people know that it's either gonna be a millage or parking, I just feel like everybody in this town hates the idea and they'd say, yes, let's do a millage.
I favor paid parking, obviously. I've been talking about that for 4 months now or something. We put the Headley out there and people didn't want their taxes to go up. So we were in a position where we had to come up with some revenue or cut services. People didn't want services cut. And I don't love to pay for parking. That's not my favorite thing to do. But as a responsible citizen, I also want to be able to have my recycles picked up. I also want to do the other things that cost this town money to do. And it isn't free. And I think a millage might go out there, it might pass, it might not pass. So next budget season, we're not going to have the money we need. We're going to have to cut services or staff or something. And I guess I'm struggling with why is paid parking so offensive to people? Why is it that
Just maybe about 6 reasons, Nancy.
well, because it takes away from the charm of the town. I guess I don't agree with that. But why is it so offensive? Do you not go to Petoskey because you have to pay 50 cents an hour to park? Does it
Not
keep
travel
you
anywhere in the
from
world because
doing
you might
that?
have to pay a car.
I'm having trouble understanding why it's so upsetting to people
Yeah.
to have to pay $1 an hour to
But
park.
The difference is people who, if you live here, it's the quick trip into town, I think is maybe the one issue.
Okay.
It's like, I don't make a quick trip to Petoskey every day, but I've been be doing my drugstore at Kelbel's, and I'm gonna go to Gurney's to buy stuff. And so if those are the quick trips, I'm gonna return a book to the library. So now I have to pay to step out of my car and walk up the stairs in the library to return a book. Those are the kinds of things that I think are what bug people about it. It's that kind of quick trip. So I'm not saying I understand the revenue problem, and I'm not disagreeing it necessarily from a revenue standpoint.
I went to Petoskey today and I shopped at the grain train and I went to Jose's for lunch. And then I went to Reed's Furniture and I didn't put a nickel in the machine and I didn't get a ticket.
There's that option.
So there's always that option. If you're that opposed to parking, don't pay for it. Take your chance. If you're gonna be there, if you're gonna drop off a book at the library, you can probably
Run
get
upstairs,
away.
come back down, go in and get your mail.
Well, there's an outside drop.
You're there for 2 minutes.
It's not the end of the world to have to, we're not trying to penalize the people who live here.
No,
We're trying to make things better for the people who live here so that you don't have to pay more taxes. So we're gonna penalize the tourists mostly because it's in the summertime. So, I'm all for paid parking, but I don't want paid parking in Harbor Springs. I understand the charm of the town and the kiosks and everything else. I've been in that situation where you do it and you get up to the thing and it wants your license plate number. So you gotta trudge back to your car and get your license plate number when you're on vacation because you don't know it. It's inconvenient, but it's a fact of life in the world that we live in. Where can you go and not have paid parking? Yeah, Hanaway, up to the UP. There's not many places in the world where you don't have to pay for parking. And most places, they penalize you to park. So, that's. Jeff.
Sorry, I have a comment, thought, question. Because I think the Gurney's parking lot is a perfect example because people are frequently only using that spot for maybe 15 minutes. They're running in to get a sandwich, they're running to Kelp's Pharmacy. Could we keep some sites like the Gurney's parking lot, the Spring Street parking lot as free parking, but with a 20-minute maximum time?
How are we gonna enforce?
I don't know. It would be difficult to enforce. I don't know how much we're down there, but that might be a middle ground where we have areas of paid parking, but then have areas of non-paid for somebody that's just running a quick errand, if that's a possibility.
Well, that was the general idea, was keeping the Spring Street lot free as well as some of the other lots and like the beach lot and, most of parts of Third Street as well. That was the idea, to have some spots where people can.
But I think what'll happen with those free spots, like Spring Street, is the morning people that come to work are gonna fill those slots up. So they're not gonna be available for that short, quick 15-minute run in. I don't know quite how to solve that. I think that's a great idea, Jeff, but to enforce a 20-minute parking spot and making sure people move in 15 minutes is gonna be.
We ran into that during COVID when we had, for example, in front of Between the Covers, one spot for people to come in and out.
Right.
And then Turkey's wanted a place and then Pearson's wanted a place
Right.
because it was, since COVID, there's been a lot more takeouts.
Mhm.
And a lot of people wanted this in and out, 15-minute parking.
We have loading zones in town. Zip into a loading zone, put your flashers on. I guess I do it, get a cup of coffee.
You guys recommended breaking all sorts of laws, aren't you?
That would just be a dollar an hour, right? Yeah, flat rate.
So it's,
With the mayor, I've talked to when we talked with the consultants, Mayor, and you had brought up a good point, was that our police are not out there
Yeah.
24/7. They're gonna do random checks like they do right now, 2 or 3 times a day. So, the odds that you go there for 15 minutes, 10 minutes to go to the post office, would encourage people not to pay, but the odds are really in your favor that they're not gonna catch you for 5 minutes for turning on Return your workers and things.
You know, it's like Petoskey, you see the meter guy going the other way.
Tell him all his secrets.
Yeah, parking. It's common sense.
Are you gonna be there for an hour? Pay 50 cents or whatever.
You're gonna be there for 15 minutes, take your chances.
Our revenue stream is dropping quickly.
Well,
Well, I'm just concerned we're gonna get to the same place we were this fall, if we don't do something that we can
We
put
will.
in place quickly, which isn't a millage that we can do quickly. I think
Will be
we're gonna
worse.
end up having to do that in addition to it,
Village 4 times a year.
but we can't get it together that fast. I can't remember, Nick told us
We
how
got, I think, July, we have to have the language ready.
to vote in November.
And it wouldn't get voted on until November.
Till November.
We're right back into budget.
We can have a special election anytime we choose.
But you still have to prepare for it.
Well, I think
Use
chances
this
are good
as
we're
a
gonna-
hammer to try
There will be
to push a
public-
millage through. It's not gonna be any more popular than a millage.
I know, but I'm just thinking like if you guys are elected to represent the people and the people clearly don't want paid parking, you know, shouldn't we like really work really hard to find some other revenue streams?
We are gonna try and find some other revenue streams.
I think we're gonna have to do both, Dana,
Yeah.
in all honesty. I think we're probably going to have this type of revenue stream as well as millages. Because
Previous- At a previous meeting, we discussed in November about, and actually there was residents here talking about how we don't have a diversified enough revenue stream. And so if something happens to our taxes, if we pass another millage and it's relying on taxpayers and something happens to the economy in that sense, at least we have another revenue stream such as paid parking to pick up some of the slack. I mean, that diversification is key. I mean, and if we just rely on taxes only, it could spell more trouble for us in the future. Well, I'm not saying that means we have to go with paid parking, but when we looked at the feasible revenue options, I mean, they included income tax or options that cities are allowed to do. No one wants to have the city do an income tax. What are other options for raising revenue? I mean,
So
there's
here's
very
a
few.
sort of far out option with paid parking. So we put it in place this summer, we see what kind of revenue we make from it. We make a good chunk of revenue from it. Maybe people who are homesteaders get an exemption for it down the road. Maybe there's some way to put in your license plate number for people but bear with me, I mean, it's a possibility. With this kind of system, we could do that. We could put in license plate numbers that didn't have to pay. I'm not proposing that for the first year.
I
Actually,
don't care if I pay $1, that's not the point.
I was, real, but to your point, I wouldn't be troubled at all to pay X amount for,
The whole year,
for the season,
okay?
as long as it plugs my number in the system.
Yeah.
And it doesn't come up. I mean,
So you're just
I don't
doing
know
the
what it would-
inconvenience of having to do it every time you come down.
basically.
That's really more
But
what
the
you're
question
doing.
is whether
And-
it's
and my
the
problem is-
software features,
I'm the generation that maybe is used to putting
if they can.
quarters and
they
nickels
tier
in
it.
the parking meter. And I'm not used to using my iPhone or credit card for parking because it drives me
I'm
crazy to
guessing
do
that's
that for
not
dollar items.
Something that
Uh-huh.
you
But
need
if I can put
to
a chunk in there and feel like I'm done for the season,
There's been talk about residents having permits.
Yeah, so there's a way, there might be a way.
It's the inconvenience more of having to, I mean, that's what I'm hearing you say,
it's
is
the
it's the
irritation.
inconvenience of having to do it every time. So is there any way to do that, Victor, with
Sure,
this?
just write it
system?
down.
I can check with.
Yeah, if somebody could pay X amount for the season, and then you wouldn't have to mess with paying each time, I
It
don't
sort of
know.
goes, that's gonna fall like to a lot of people, it's like permit parking, basically. You're purchasing their permit. So anybody who works downtown would ask for the same type of thing. When we go down that rabbit hole, like any employee is gonna say, okay, if I pay $300 a year, does that cover me for the year? So in essence, we would be allowing permit parking.
I see.
I'm not saying opposed to it, I'm just saying that
It works counter to the goal of trying to get
people move.
And we already have businesses that have stated at an open meeting that they would just pay it for all of their employees and look at it as a cost of business.
Right.
I think it's still worth asking, because there may be other ways to implement it, but you can drive a truck through that hole.
Unless we sell them for like $10,000.
No.
Sorry.
No.
Well, there will be other additional opportunities for public input and
Yes.
review. And
Some more comments to
Maybe we
read them. I forgot where we left off.
Someone was upset.
yeah, that one.
Right there.
Mayor Keffer, perhaps try with app only, first without parking stands, maybe a speed camera instead. Speed cameras can create revenue year round and keep the speeds down. How is it that this city has such money problem with all the non-homestead taxpayers? That's because we do not get that revenue. Tim Knapp, everyone was not for the meters on the DDA. The DDA said we did not want to touch this at all because we already visited. If the city wanted, they could, but the DDA did not want parking meters. We all agree that if the city wanted to take this out, they could, but we're done with parking. That's not what happened, Tim. Why don't you have paid parking? No, it didn't. Kathy, Nikki, and all, there's people who said we want paid parking.
They just didn't want the aggravation of.
They don't want to take
Dealing with it,
responsibility.
Why don't you have paid parking on Wednesday through Sunday? This will allow for the quick trips, or start the parking time at 11 to allow for quick errands. You'll penalize the people who live in the streets without the paid parking. You can come to my town and park for free. It's thriving. That's from Peggy. Mary Lee, I'm a summer resident who lives on a big city in the Midwest, and we do not pay for parking except if we go to the theater downtown. We're only suggesting downtown paid parking. Okay, Tim Knapp, November 4th DDA meeting, states Victor was going to bring a city council, not that we were for it. Carrie K, whoever said, okay, Mary Lee, how can we buy a season pass for parking Harbor Springs? BA Keys, I'll buy a pass too. Good comment, Mary Lee. Season pass is a great idea and will generate revenue and no ugly parking meters. That's from Merritt. Mary Lee, we buy a tag. The tracks are driving on the toll road in our area. How can we get a tag for parking in Harbor Springs? We don't want to think about paying for parking every time. Carrie K, as a taxpayer, why do you all think this is so funny? Why all the laughing? Karen Stroud, we can pay an annual fee to access Michigan State Parks, or we pay by the visit. I also know St. Joseph, Michigan monitors the parking limits with a police car with the camera checking cars that exceeds a 2-hour limit, and they issue tickets accordingly.
What do you need from us?
Well, to go forward, I would need to talk to the two of the vendors to come back with a finalized plan on locations. So I guess I need council whether you want to go forward with this basic structure, or if you want to pause it, or want more discussions or whatnot.
Discuss this for the rest of our lives.
I'll make a motion, you go with passport and whatever that,
Traffic and safety.
thank you, yes.
Come up with a detailed plan. Anyways, I'll second that.
I have a question about timing. How soon does a decision have to be made to have it in for this summer? Do we have any idea what the time frame is?
Talking to them, they say probably be about 2 to 3 months beforehand, so they can get the parking kiosk ordered and all the plans in place, the signs and everything. So to get it by May,
Next month.
February, you'd want to.
February.
I mean, of course, then we don't have to start it. We could roll it out later.
Well, we start at June
We could start whenever you want, so yeah.
I'm kind of tired of going over the same stuff too, guys, but I also don't want to offend people
No.
that are, concerned about it. So I'm
I'm just
just,
offended by some of the people coming out and going,
I know.
All we're authorizing is to go to the next level. There will be another meeting, there will be other opportunities for input. But
Okay,
if we're gonna have a chance of doing this, we need the next.
so we're asking for a presentation. I just want to be clear what, we're asking for a presentation from whomever we choose to come to us in February. And then we can make the decision of yay or nay.
And then the cost would have to be reviewed, the locations would have to be reviewed, the policies would have to be reviewed. This is just moving the ball a little bit.
And though this template that I have of those charts, you see that, I can bring that information to those vendors so they can work with that information and create a plan.
Okay, I do have a motion and a second. No other questions, I'll do a roll call.
John Cops,
Yes.
Matt O'Gara,
Yes.
John Leo,
Yes.
Nancy Rondell.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you. On to item D, which is administrative agreement edits, revisions. The administrative agreement covers department heads and non-union employees. So basically, there's 6 of us. There's Jeff Grimm as a zoning administrator, assessor, Chief Knight, Lucas, DPW, Rachel at Parks, Nick, and myself.
Lucas.
Yeah, Lucas, DPW, yeah. So there's about 6 of us. Changes any given year depending on positions. For example, the electric superintendent, Denny, was a non-union person, but then we arranged a DPW electric department so that new supervisor is part of the union. So really, we're looking at this because to look mostly for changes to time off, how our employees utilize comp time and the procedures and whether it's fair or not. And we found some things that weren't fair to the employer, to the city, as well as some things that might have been more fair for the non-union employees. So our current version says there's nothing about employees having to get approval to work overtime. And so making that change in this one is that employees must get approval to work overtime. It doesn't have to necessarily be like tonight I need to work overtime. Like with Chief Knight, he's like, I have shifts coming up, in the next few weeks where I have to work overtime. Okay. It's basically to prevent the abusing of people racking up overtime or comp time. So another suggestion change is that an employee's comp time bank at the beginning of the year cannot exceed 80 hours. Right now, there's no limit to what their comp time bank can be at. So for example, if you work for the city 10 years and you've carried over 40 hours each year, you could be at 400 hours and technically take those 400 hours off. I just don't think that makes sense it's not a good policy for the city to have employees with that much comp time. As a trade-off, we're increasing the number of comp time hours employee can roll over to the next year from 40 to 80. So right now they can roll over 40 every year, but now we're suggesting they can roll over 80 a year. But then when the next year starts, their bank goes down to 80. So instead of that 80 and 80 adding up, they're at 80 when the next year starts over. And then the other option we're also doing them to is to get paid out for that 80 hours as opposed to using that as comp time. And this is a good solution because sometimes a lot of our employees don't, like let's say they're doing a lot of overtime work in October, November, December, they can't take their comp time off. They just can't. So it's a way for them saying, all right, you might not be able to roll it over, but you're getting paid for that 2 weeks. Of course, this wouldn't apply to city manager on a separate contract. So I'm not gonna try to get paid out for that. It's mostly for the employees who definitely recognize that, especially during certain times of the year, they put a lot of time in and they just can't use their comp time. PTO must be approved in advance. Right now there should be approved in advance. And I just think saying PTO must be approved in advance. Of course, there's current language that, bars, emergency situations if someone's sick or if someone's in a hospital or whatnot. They can't get to me, they can't get to me. But if they know they're taking some time off, they must let me know. I also have more tools to address tardiness by creating consequences for not notifying the city manager prior to the start of the shift. So really this just, gives me a way to say, all right, if you're not going to let me know you're taking off PTO, all right, well, I'm going to make you use your CTO, your comp time instead of PTO. So, and there's significance there because PTO, you can bank that from year to year. So it is kind of like a penalty, if a way to incentivize people to inform me that they're going to be late. So the other options was about the complaint procedure. So I just want to clarify that the complaint procedure does not apply to misconduct, poor performance, or insubordination. And also to limit the scope of the complaint procedure to disagreements between employees and department heads and to disagreements amongst council appointed employees. The charter and the city code really gives authority to city manager to do any disciplinary action. So the way our administrative agreement talks about going to personnel committee, which is council members, to do any kind of action like that is really contrary to the charter and the city code. And after talking with Jim Raymer, he said he really advised that this needs to be changed because the charter is clear about who has the powers to discipline and et cetera. However, there are certain employees like zoning administrator, assessor, and city clerk and treasurer who are appointed by council. So there need to be a way to handle disagreements between those council appointed employees and the city manager that I can't directly fire or discipline. That's the council's job. So still recognizing that. So those are the two big change areas. One is the comp time, PTO time, and one is the complaint procedure. And I know we've sat down and I've given with department heads, I've shared this with all the non-union employees. They've provided their feedback, and I don't know if everyone's 100% agreement on everything, but I think we pretty much recognize there's some give and take from both sides here.
Makes sense to me.
Makes sense.
There's
I mean, there's some good changes in there. So when this is implemented, anyone who has over the 80 hours, would they get paid out? I mean, are you gonna roll over them from the old system to the new system if there's anybody that has over the
They're
maximum?
gonna start out at 80 for this year. So they're gonna be
Is
reduced.
there anyone over that?
Kyle, me, Nick.
So what
Lucas.
happens in that transition?
Just lose that. You lose that.
You lose, so it's basically a use or lose policy.
I mean, we just don't have time to use it anyway, so.
What's the work week here? How many hours?
For city hall staff, it's 37.5. For DPW and police, it's 40 or depending on your overtime use.
Yeah. My work week's 9 hours a day, so that's what mine's based on.
So I just.
Need a motion?
Yeah, I recommend to approve this administrative agreement.
My only concern is that people who have accrued the time lose it because of a transition from one plan to another plan. Losing it going forward with the understanding that you can tap out. I get that, and it will motivate them to either cash out or to, many companies that I work for did this to encourage people to take some time off so they don't burn out.
Mm-hmm.
So in general, I agree, I'm a little uneasy with
About
people
the
losing.
time they've already.
Yeah, they earned it with the expectation that it would be there. I'm not sure I like the idea that they'd lose it.
How do you fix it?
Pay them out to the 80.
Cash.
Well, the 80 pay them out.
Yeah, they earned it. Again, going forward, you have to understand the premise of your employment in order to stick to a policy. We're agreeing to change the policy, I think, for good reasons, but I think they should get paid out for what they've already accrued. And then going forward, everybody knows what the rules are. It's the way I would want to be treated.
It's the fair way to do it, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
Sure you are.
Well, it doesn't apply to me, so.
So with that change, I would make a motion to approve the suggested changes.
We'll start with that.
John Leo,
Yes.
Matt O'Gara,
Yes.
John Cox, Nancy Randall,
Yes.
motion carried.
One straggling chat. That was from pay park. So. All right, we'll move on to city manager's report, I guess. Yeah, we're there. Okay. Meter testing is beginning on our utility, electric utilities. Paul's meter testing, they're driving a red van. They're starting on the east side of Harbor Springs system, which is kind of by Petoskey Brewery. They're going west. So you'll see them over the course of several weeks. So if any residents see a red van, Paul's meter testing, they're there on behalf of the city to test meters. Winterfest, Rachel already summed that up, so thank you, Rachel. We've been discussing M119 Phase 3 electric pole and conductor replacement project with MDOT. So MDOT came to us, this project was slated for this spring. They came to us, said they had worries about slope stabilization on the bluff side there, and they're proposed some alternative solutions for us to relocate our poles and our project, but that's very expensive. So we're looking at other options to see if we can cut costs. So we'll eventually come back to council with potentially a slightly revised plan and some bids there. Housing North has filled its program director position. This is this position which we've contributed money for annual funds in order to help the region's housing issues. Director's name is Andrea Jacobs. She began last Monday, I believe. And finally, city planner Larry Nix has submitted his retirement letter. He's served the city's contractual planner for about 32 years. He's going to officially retire once the master plan update is completed, so he can help us transition there. We do appreciate Larry's work and guidance over the years. He's willing to also, help do whatever planner we choose to just help him transition in the role as well. So we're going to start advertising for that. It's really hard up here because for a part-time contractual planning position, there's not that many options up in northern Michigan. So Larry, of course, worked downstate, and that's an option. You might have to again look downstate, but we're trying to look local as well.
Does Housing North have a planner that they work with?
No, Networks Northwest has planners on theirs, and they're based out of Traverse City area. They do have some planners on staff. They contract with other municipalities.
What's the hiring process going to be? Who's going to lead the recruiting?
So it's good. We're gonna put like an RFQ out, and we're gonna involve the planning commission and determining, at least an interview or at least a discussion with potential candidates if they want.
But you're going to.
But I'm gonna lead the actual hiring process. Only board meeting we had was a zoning board of appeals meeting on January 12th. And we were just basically reviewing potential ZBA bylaws edits. Several meetings again with the paid parking vendors. I had, as mentioned, an MDOT meeting regarding the phase 3 project. We've had a meeting with our city's new energy efficiency and clean energy provider, Franklin Energy. We have been working with Efficiency United for several years. Franklin Energy is getting started, and we've talked about the programs and options, and I'm really so far impressed with what they're offering. So they're going to put Harbor Springs on their website soon, so residents will be able to go to their website, and if there's programs for Harbor Springs residents, they'll be on display there. So, and also in Lansing, I had a monthly MPPA Board of Commissioners meeting. And that's all. I guess some updates about that, though. We are still required to, there's some legislation being considered at the state about in-person meetings, whether or not meetings should be done remotely. For example, some of these authorities like the NPPA, you have people coming from all over the entire state, from the Upper Peninsula, all the way to Lansing for a 3-4 hour meeting. And they're trying to lobby the state to say, hey, sometimes for some types of meetings, it makes sense if our participants can participate remotely, like through Zoom or something. But the state so far doesn't want to tackle that. They want to stick to in-person meetings. So
That would be the authority to vote. If you're remote.
Yeah. Obviously, you can still participate, but you can't vote, right? You're right, the authority to vote. So I still have to travel to those meetings to Lansing for now. City council new business.
And
No,
You can go.
you can go.
All right.
Got him.
That's it. Meeting adjourned. Thank you for coming.
I was thinking about halfway through the meeting.